You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday 25th of April 2014. UK violent crime heading for record rise. Cornish people granted minority status within UK. Thanks to BBC, Abdullah Deghay's mother pays tribute to naive boy. Austria, indestructible armoured police tank damaged by eggs and tennis balls. France, new Front National mayor moves to quash Paris region mosque. Italian right calls for end to migrant rescue programme. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Cartuso County, Georgia, man convicted of sexual abuse of 5 young girls gets life plus 250 years. Meet world's first married lesbian threesome and they're expecting a baby due in July. Thought for the day, waste not, want not. And finally, the pickle slicer. UK news. UK, violent crime heading for record rise. After years of fiddle crime figures, new data shows violent crime increased last year and could be set for a huge surge. Violent crime could be on the brink of a record rise in England and Wales after 2 police forces which adopted open and ethical crime recording policies showed a 25% jump in violence last year. Apparently it is a record low according to the mainstream media. World at 8. Of course it is. We should call the mainstream news channels the channels of hope not hate, or rather don't think or don't speak the truth. Cornish people granted minority status within UK. Cornish people will be granted minority status under European rules for the protection of national minorities. Chief Secretary to the Treasury Danny Alexander made the announcement on a visit to the country. Dick Cole, leader of Mebyon Cernau, which campaigns for Cornish devolution, said, "This is a fantastic development. This is a proud day for Cornwall. The Cornish will gain the same status as other Celtic communities, the Scots, Welsh and Irish." World at 8. Perhaps for us all to gain minority status, we should all be examined and tribalised, like in the days of the Third Reich. Where do the Anglo-Saxons and the Ice Age people come in all this trivia? Thanks to BBC, Abdullah Deghay's mother pays tribute to naive boy. The mother of a teenager who was killed in Syria has paid tribute to a naive, brave boy. Abdullah Deghay's 18 from Saltdean near Brighton in East Sussex was reportedly fighting with a militant group when he was shot. His brothers Jafar 16 and Amr 20 are still thought to be in Syria, having gone there with an aid convoy in October. Anas Abulsayan said her dead son was a very naive, very helpful, brave boy. Abdullah left for Syria in January without telling his mother. A few months later he was dead, apparently killed fighting against President Assad's forces with a militant group linked to Al-Qaeda. Definitely he is in a better life, Ms Abulsayan said. Lots of people ask to have death, but this is chosen from God. You can't say about my sons they are terrorists, never ever, she added. World at 8. Just a day after police asked mothers and communities to help stop their sons and daughters going on jihad, the BBC helps a mother tell us of how naive of her son. May Allah bless all her sons with the paradise they so richly deserve. It's too bad her husband and the boy's uncle are too cowardly to go to Syria. President Bashar al-Assad's supporters have a very good cure for naivety. I think all good Muslim sons should go to Syria and pass their problems back near their Mecca, and hopefully don't come back. In fact, why should we keep their families on our money when their sons are fighting a jihad? Deport them alongside, I say. European news. Austria, indestructible armoured police tank damaged by eggs and tennis balls. An Austrian manufacturer of a high-tech anti-riot water cannon, costing almost €1 million, is facing some tough questions after one of the vehicles was badly damaged during a demonstration that involved eggs and tennis balls. Germany's Interior Ministry has ordered 78 of the Huawei 10 water cannons, which the manufacturer Rosenbauer boasts can tackle the toughest punishment in the most extreme situations. This was enough for police chiefs in the central German province of Thuringen, who decided to stage a display for the public once they received the first delivery of the new vehicles. In order to construct the right environment, they equipped their own officers with eggs, tennis balls and half-litre plastic bottles filled with water instead of bricks, stones and Molotov cocktails that they might have expected in a real-life situation. Yet the public display backfired badly after the most harmless ammunition left huge dents in the armoured glass of the 33-tonne vehicle, which comes equipped with a 10,000-litre water tank. The scandal came to light when the police were forced to ask the Interior Ministry for the money to repair the damage. There are 3 huge dents in the supposedly indestructible polycarbonate glass and answers are being demanded. World at 8. Water cannons work well, as do attack dogs and guns. France. New Front National mayor moves to quash parish region mosque. The recently elected Front National mayor of a Parisian suburb has not wasted any time in following through on one of his campaign promises, upend a project for a new mosque. Mantes-la-Ville Mayor Cyril Nauth has promised to block the project, citing parking problems in the neighbourhood where the future mosque is supposed to stand, as well as potential financial liabilities for the local government. World at 8. Good man, good man. Italian right calls for end to migrant rescue programme. Italian right-wing politicians have called for the country's programme to rescue North African refugees from the Mediterranean Sea to be scrapped after figures suggested that 1,100 immigrants have been rescued in the past 2 days. Following the Arab Spring in 2011, which sparked a series of revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa, hundreds and thousands of refugees and economic migrants have attempted to cross the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. The issue is likely to become a focal point in Italy's European election campaign over the coming weeks, after Matteo Salvini, head of the anti-immigration Northern League party, called for the operation to be scrapped, saying Italian citizens end up financing the people smugglers and an invasion of our coasts. Meanwhile, Maurizio Gaspari, a former minister in Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party, described the programme as an expensive and maniacal operation which must be immediately stopped, in a statement on Tuesday 22nd of April. World at 8. Rather like our pay for, give out all programme for new migrants. Expensive and maniacal. Belly of the beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP.
With the parliamentary term well and truly over, I'm working flat out on the European elections here in Britain now, with a few bits of work for constituents and with my MEP team still going on in the background. In the last 2 nights I did meetings in Blackpool and in South Shields in the northeast. An especially good one there last night, where we raised the money for 3 more entire parliamentary constituencies. But more is still needed, and if you can help, please donate online or call head office tomorrow and give what you can. In particular, we only raised the money for the Welsh deposit very late in the day, and we've only got a few more days in which to raise more money to get enough leaflets to cover all our best areas there. Coming back to the question of Blackpool, one subject that always crops up there when I'm there is fracking, because it's a big issue locally. And while I was at the meeting, one of the locals gave me a copy of a web report on comments by Louis Allstadt, the former vice president of Mobil Oil, at a news conference in Albany, New York State. In a straight from the horse's mouth message, the former oil executive, who was a top manager with Mobil for 31 years, warned that, quote, making fracking safe is simply not possible, not with the current technology or with the inadequate regulations being proposed, unquote. So there we go. It's a very, very senior oil executive saying, quite simply, that fracking is madness. But of course, the political elite are determined to push ahead with it, with UKIP leading the pack in their enthusiasm for allowing big oil to loot and pollute vast swathes of rural Britain, and with the condemned government busily planning to push through new laws denying homeowners, that's probably you, the right to object to fracking, even directly under your own home. If it's any consolation, though, in Britain, we're not the only ones. The Ukraine is also in targets of the frackers, and the new puppet government there has shown its true colours by signing a deal just the other day, giving American oil companies the right to frack Ukraine, the right to poison that country's water supply for generations in order to get a few years cheap gas. Now, a key role for the neocons, for this strange, weird political elite who were behind not just the bogus Ukrainian revolution, but also the wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the attempted overthrow of the legitimate government of Syria, and so on. A key aim of these people is securing enough energy to guarantee the very energy-intensive American way of life long into the future. And this is a key reason they're pushing for war with Russia. Because there's much more to their evil than just trying to grab other countries' oil. That's not what the wars are all about. I'd like to speak to you about these people and what they're trying to do for a few minutes, because it's really, really important. I'd like you to Google in due course, Project for the New American Century. This was an American-based neocon organisation of big business and various crackpot Zionists who came up at the end of the last century with a plan to ensure that America, or rather their version of America, would remain predominant for the next 100 years. The first openly stated aim was, as I said, to secure enough energy around the world to keep the country going in the manner to which it's become accustomed. The second big openly stated aim is US military hegemony, ensuring that America is and remains the most powerful military force by far on the entire planet for decades and decades to come. As part of this, they developed the doctrine of what they call prompt global strike. What is that? Well, to put it in simple terms, it's the idea that America should be ready, willing and able to launch such a devastating preemptive strike, a first strike, an aggressive war against any other nation on the planet, that it could do so whenever it wanted and suffer no retaliation. And if you've wondered why the Russians seem particularly keen, particularly desperate in fact, to keep control of the eastern part of Ukraine, if you've wondered why they're so concerned about the idea of Ukraine turning towards the EU and America and NATO, they need to understand this, that when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the Soviet Union collapsed, the peace deal, the agreement to settle it all made between the then Soviet Union and the Americans and NATO, was that Germany should be reunited, that Poland could, if it wanted, join the European Union, but the NATO missiles, American missiles, must stay where they were in the middle of Germany and not be moved up to the Polish-Russian border. That was what encouraged the Russians to do that very sensible deal, which reunited Germany and ended part of the sorry chapter and the aftermath of the terrible Second World War. And then NATO promptly went back on their word and moved their missiles to the Polish-Russian border. And now they're aiming to do so on the Ukrainian border as well. And this is all in keeping with their doctrine of prompt global strike. Because if they have their defence missiles and their attack missiles back in Connecticut or somewhere in East Anglia, then if they're to be fired, Russia would have the time to respond and retaliate and not be wiped out without a shot being fired. Thereby, mutually assured destruction would ensure that neither side does anything so bloody stupid as launching a thermonuclear war. But if those missiles are on the Polish-Russian border, on the Ukrainian-Russian border, then Russia simply wouldn't have the time to react effectively in self-defence, and the criminal elite running the American military will feel they can take out Russia whenever they want. There's an eerie echo of history in here, not of 1914, 100 years ago, but actually of the Second World War, where the criminals running America then put so much pressure on Japan in terms of restricting her oil supply, restricting raw materials such as iron, that Japan in the end was left feeling that there was no choice but to go to war before she was economically strangled to death. Now, what the Japanese did once they were at war, particularly to British servicemen and civilians captured in places like Singapore, was absolutely disgusting and unforgivable. A stain on that nation forever and ever and ever, and something that we should never forget nor need ever forgive. But, having said that, it's a simple fact of history that the Japanese were forced into war by American elite economic aggression in the first place. They made it simply unavoidable. They made it inevitable that the Japanese would do a Pearl Harbor. And of course, the people running America at the time knew in advance that Pearl Harbor was about to happen. And they let it happen They let thousands of their innocent sailors get slaughtered. They let it happen to get their good-hearted, decent, soft people simply fighting mad and to drag them into war. Now that might sound a little bit like 9/11 to you. Perhaps, perhaps not. Have a look online, make up your own minds. But it certainly is not the first time, and it certainly, I fear, won't be the last, in which the criminals running America have allowed American interests and civilians and servicemen to be attacked in order to get the Americans fighting back mad enough to send their sons and now daughters and taxes into someone else's war. Coming back to the project for the new American century, it was officially wound up after they succeeded in getting America and us into the Iraq War. But their model of working, of using money and the media and subverting to manipulate public opinion at home and to manipulate events in target countries, is still going on. They were responsible for the bogus revolutions in Egypt and in Libya. They were responsible for the so-called popular uprisings, murdering policemen from the very beginning, that sparked the current civil war in Syria. And the same systems were used to produce the anti-Russian bogus revolution in Ukraine, where, of course, what they're doing now is potentially a trigger for World War III, and therefore worthwhile looking at just a little bit more closely. Did you know, for example, that in the last 23 years, it's estimated that successive American governments have spent between $20 and $30 billion subverting the Ukraine? Did you know that the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA-stroke corporate-funded front organisation in the United States, had an annual $100 million budget with which to fund over 2,000 NGOs, non-governmental organisations in Ukraine, all of them designed to turn ordinary Ukrainians against their Russian brothers and sisters and towards being exploited and ripped off and subjugated by the West, particularly the European Union and NATO. Did you know that those so-called independent spontaneous demonstrations in Maidan Square in the middle of Kiev, which brought down the legitimately democratically elected government, were funded to the tune of $20 million every week by the CIA? That's the case. An interesting character in all this is the American, well, actually really isn't American at all, Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland. She was there back in Maidan Square in Kiev in December, handing out biscuits, cookies, as the Americans would say, to the demonstrators. More recently, she was at the centre of controversy when she was taped in a telephone conversation when she was giving the US ambassador in Kiev his orders as to who should be in and out of the new puppet government. Fuck the EU, she was recorded as saying, which wasn't very polite. But far more important is the fact that here you had an American Assistant Secretary of State dictating who is going to be running the new puppet government in a sovereign state nearly halfway around the world. Victoria Nuland is a very interesting woman. She's married to one Robert Kagan. The name probably means nothing to you. It meant nothing to me till I looked it up. Then I found that Robert Kagan is a senior official, a senior member of the Council for Foreign Relations, which is a Rockefeller-Federal Reserve front. It's the organisation, one of the organisations, whereby the banksters who run the United States give their orders to assorted puppet politicians. It's a little bit like, and it's related to the Bilderberg group, who you're more likely to have heard of. And Robert Kagan isn't just a senior figure in the banksters' Council for Foreign Relations. He was also a co-founder, you may have guessed it, of the project for the new American century. The people who back in 1999 decided they were going to remake, i.e. break, the Arab world and surround, neutralise and destroy independent Russia. The charming Victoria was also implicated more recently in the cover-up of the appalling scandal of the American military and the CIA supplying arms to Al-Qaeda in Syria. That's right, the Americans have armed and continue to arm the self-same people who are supposed to have brought down the Twin Towers in 9/11. And Victoria Nuland was part of the now failed cover-up of that wicked policy. She was also the foreign policy advisor to Dick Cheney, former Vice President of the United States with Bush Jr. and at the same time President of Halliburton, one of the biggest military industrial corporations on the planet, and a really very unhealthy relationship there. Because see, when Dick Cheney is wearing his, or was wearing, his political hat, he was there using his power to drag America into war and Britain into war as well. And then he was switching to his corporate hat, and then Halliburton was getting the contracts to supply and equip the American forces as they flattened other people's countries, and then getting the contracts. In fact, in several of them in Iraq, Halliburton were the only company even allowed to bid for the contracts to put the pieces of Humpty Dumpty back together again. If you've read my study, What Lies Behind the English Defence League, and if you haven't, I do recommend it, it's worthwhile, though I say it myself, you'll recognise the name, and you'll also know that Cheney's chief gopher at the project for the new American century, the ubiquitous Frank Gaffney, was directly behind the team that founded the EDL, with the intention of so winding up the white working class in Britain to hate all Muslims everywhere that they'd happily go off and fight and die, not just in the streets of Birmingham, but also, more to the point, in Afghanistan, or Syria, or Iraq, or Iran. And Gaffney also has huge influence and financial clout in the incestuous network of upper-class gay Gentiles and crackpot young Zionist fascists who provide the manpower for the neocon propaganda machine that's driving us to war with Russia. It includes groups such as Policy Exchange and the Centre for Social Cohesion in Britain. And through them, not just to the current drive for potential war against Russia, but also in recent years through their Nothing British front group to try to break the BNP, because only nationalists can stand up effectively to their wicked drive to war. Of course, they failed to break us, and they'll fail again with this drive to war, not least because times have changed. When the banksters and the military-industrial corporations and their political puppets tried to herd the unsuspecting masses into wars in the past, they had a huge advantage because they, or people like them, also had a complete monopoly on information, controlling the newspapers, controlling the radio, controlling Hollywood, controlling everywhere where people got ideas from. Not anymore. The internet's changed all that forever. The internet's changed all that for good. And so more and more people are becoming aware of the criminals behind the current events in that distant place, Ukraine and Crimea. TV stations such as RT are helping as well, and are well worth watching if you want to learn the truth. But the important thing is ordinary people telling other ordinary people what's going on in the internet. It's broken the old monopoly on information that the criminals had forever. And you can help too, so please pass on this information. Send the links to this broadcast to your friends. Go and look at the project for the New American Century, and when you've found out more about it, pass it on to people through the social media, because the more people who know about it, the harder it is for the criminals to maintain their drive for war. If we don't stop them, they really are risking World War III. I don't say they automatically want World War III, although massive destruction would, for some years, help to prop up their banking system from its otherwise inevitable demise. But they're certainly prepared to risk it. Are they insane? Well, interestingly, Victoria's father, one Sherwin Newland, wrote a medical history of the family, in which he revealed that there was various lunatics through various parts of the last century had to be treated with electroconvulsive therapy, electric shock treatment. That's how mad some of these people are. So now we've got an opportunity to give the whole rotten gang of them an electric or an electrical shock therapy treatment ourselves. So please don't forget those donations for leaflets. Wales and Scotland especially need your helping hand. But if you want to give to any specific area of England, you only have to say when you phone up to donate. But please do it straight away, because time is running out for us to get the best campaign possible, just as time is running out for those of us opposing war. But I'll tell you this as well, it's also running out for the warmongers, because our time will come, and so will justice to them.
Thank you very much, Nick, and have a good weekend. World News. Catoosa County, Georgia. Man convicted of sexual abuse of 5 young girls gets life plus 250 years. Now that is the way it should be done over here. A Cotuso County man, James Martin Ferris, 34, convicted of the sexual abuse of 5 young girls and possession of child pornography, has been sentenced to life plus 250 years. Prosecutor Herbert Buzz Franklin said the evidence presented showed that Ferris had illicit sexual contact with the 5 juvenile females who ranged in age from 12 years old to 14 years old. As part of the molestation, Ferris plied the children with alcoholic beverages to impair them. The evidence included a video Ferris had made which showed Ferris sexually abusing a child who was unconscious during the course of the abuse. World at 8. The reason why we don't do that here is that Ferris is white and non-Muslim, so is open season even in the States. You show me a Muslim getting this sentence for his crimes and I'll eat my non-existent hat. We can't offend the Muslims, can we? Even after 9/11. Meet world's first married lesbian threesome, and they're expecting a baby due in July. Here comes the bride, and another one, and another one. The world's only married lesbian threesome are expecting their first child. Doll, Kitten and Bryn from Massachusetts were joined together in a marriage-style ceremony last August and are expecting a daughter in July. Kitten, 27, is pregnant after undergoing IVF treatment using an anonymous sperm donor, and the trio eventually plan to have 3 children, 1 for each of them. World at 8. Even the Mormons are unsuccessful in having legal multiple spouses in the USA, but it would appear lesbians are more equal than others in Massachusetts. I don't care who does what with or to whom, but when babies are involved and their future, I don't care. It is disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And what happens to the so-called father's rights, or is it a turkey baster? And still the media goes on about baby camps of the Third Reich, but at least they were produced naturally. Thought for the day: waste not, want not. Having read the previous news items on the 3 leses, yuck comes to mind. Despite various money-making drafts in the face of global warming, animal genocides and the frantic need to give everyone what used to be the luxuries of a few, regardless of the cost to the earth and us in the future, the above saying hasn't been listened to or adhered to since the end of the last war. Why? Because in the UK especially, the entire class system, which although riddled with wrongs and rights, had seen us through the last few hundred years without civil wars and lasting internal strife, was dead and buried and indeed embalmed, not for future use. On a personal note, I remember something that my mother, God rest her soul, said at the end of the last war when she was visiting her brother's wife Betty in Blackheath. Now my mother and uncle passed to go on to public school, but their origins were real London suburbs, pride, poverty and pianos. But Betty's mother had been the local abortionist and came from very different stock. My mother and father practically kept them in food and their daughter in clothes and cots all during the war, but like many, Betty resented this. As she was queuing up for oranges or something luxurious, my mother remarked that they didn't have them up in central London, and Betty turned to my mother with a sneer and said, "You had it all then, and now it is our turn," like the tricoteuse she was. And it is this attitude of the common people that has changed, and not for the best. No one, least of all me, denies that everyone should be given the chance for a better life, a better job and a better country. But to be made to think that because of an accident of birth one is entitled to the very best when most of the time it is not earned is and has been a giant black financial cloud over the UK and Europe. I'm not talking about the old rich or even the nobility. As the saying goes, cream always rises to the top. Whatever is going on below, and to be fair, most of the old money has been earned by someone, and in the cases of nobility, someone knew the right person to kill to acquire, rather like banking on a bad day. I just wish some of my unknown relatives had had the guts to kill the right person, and then I'd be sitting in a very, very fine house. And as the mantra goes, the working class can kiss my arse, I've got the foreman's job at last. I know the usual adage of everyone is entitled to whatever, when in fact this is not true. Not everyone is entitled to anything other than the very air they breathe, unless at some time in their lives they have worked, schemed or plotted to bring in the shekels. It is only now in this day and age that, because the worldwide doctrination of the people has hammered home this I deserve it message of the useless establishments and vote gatherers, that the world, the earth and the UK are in trouble and in fact, like our European brothers, we are still all knee-deep in kimchi. You tell me what you think about huge swathes of land in Africa being turned over to growing European flowers that cost money and carbon footprints to bring over to garages and supermarkets. They're usually nun-smelling and awful and still cost money. Why can't we grow our own? Surely in these times cut flowers, unless really expensive, are a total waste of money. This land should be turned over to the Africans to cultivate, or the Chinese, whatever, to feed people on that subcontinent to prevent them coming over to Europe for a better life. That is waste not, want not. The Chinese are now busy wiping out a particular species of whale so they can put certain contents in their lipsticks. Now don't get me wrong, I know I'm a whale lover, bless them, but the days of using mammals' oil in cosmetics should be long gone now, that whale oil lamps are. I presume no longer used even in China. Now all the cosmetics produced in that country are full of lead and other contaminants, and they are all still brought in by container ship or plane and all put on Superdrugs and Boots counters and even Avon supplies. PRC made goo. But why kill off an entire species of mammal to do it? There is no need and enough is enough. Money is money and greed is greed. But either don't buy it or sign a petition. Buy EU goo if you have to, although made in Poland does raise suspicions. But this is not waste not, want not. We are a country who has closed our own coal mines, and yet Blackheath plc have placed investments of more than 3.1 billion in coal mining since 2005. Blackheath are causing extensive harm to the lives of communities around the world and propelling climate change. It's been revealed that Blackheath invested £127 million in mining company Bumi Resources, responsible for destroying rainforest and evicting Indonesian communities from their land. Blackheath is also the world's biggest bankroller of mountaintop removal coal mining, a highly destructive method that has already caused health problems and poisoned water supplies where it has been used. We need to end Blackheath's funding of dirty coal projects that are destroying forests, polluting water and forcibly removing local communities from their land. This is not waste not, want not, is it? We've shut down British coal mines but are funding coal mines across the world. And who is doing it? Our banks. They've been listening to the fracking gurus who compare the state's landmass to ours and who are so wrong. Generally speaking, our UK landmass is thicker than that of the US, so that we would have more trouble getting to our gas with probably more adverse effects than even the states are having. Whereas in some towns all are as rich as Midas, but of course the water is not fit to drink for humans or cattle. What is the point in being rich when you can't drink the water? You tell me. Certainly it isn't waste not, want not. Open up our coal faces again, stop fracking and cut down nuclear power stations. We have prisons full of able-bodied men who could go down the pits for free. See? True waste not, want not. Waste not, want not also applies to our foreign aid policies, which should be stopped forthwith. And the NHS, of course, where we in the UK stop certain cancer treatments to our own because they're too expensive, and yet fork out happily for an African migrant to receive ongoing and lifetime HIV and AIDS treatments to prove just how multicultural we are. To each his own is the new mantra now, and in this country we are groaning under the financial weight of just too many foreigners and payouts. I saw a sight in the doctor's surgery the other day, an African married to a half Filipino and half black girl, and the result was creating mayhem unchecked in that surgery, moving all the chairs from one place to another. It was a sort of fuzzy-haired mongoloid child of about 4, and I thought this is the face of the UK in the year 2020, as per Bowie's song. Definitely not waste not, want not. Now, although not a conspiracy theorist, there must be some truth in all things, alias no smoke without fire. And if you look at the way the UK seems to have been and is the ongoing research child of some or several bods in power, you have to admit they've got their game together, haven't they? I name them all: the Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Bilderberg Group, the Frankfurt School and the diversity idiots, as well as the Zionist banksters and media moguls. The trouble is, with so many fingers in this pie of ours, there is room for trouble, and they have reckoned without the occasional Brit with a brain and a vote. Well, one hopes they have at least one brain and one vote. We the Brits have ignored all the old sayings and have voluntarily demoted our own, bringing the old working class up to the middle and creating a vacuum in the strata below which has been filled by the immigrants. The existing middle classes are dying out and the so-called working classes think their shit doesn't stink and they deserve everything free under God's sun, whilst assuming previous middle class affectations with old working class attitudes. Our placebo and Marxist-based education system has systematically politicised 2 generations into being non-political and non-racist, so that they willingly don't breed, don't think and don't care when their places are taken by the overbreeding migrants. They are in truth too good for political thought. Definitely waste and no want there. We are approaching EU elections in this country and God help us all. We in the British National Party are up against all the above, plus, and we are also against a country which acknowledges Cornish people as a minority but ignores the English minority, who stops all home-based manufacturing in 40 years and yet builds up imports to a ridiculous degree to fund other countries and at the same time encourage and pay for millions of foreigners to come in and do our jobs, impregnate our girls or groom them, buy businesses, open shops and takeaways and alter our food intake and encourage Jewish supermarkets to beat down our farmers. What happened to waste not, want not? It has all gone the way of the dodo, my friends, and probably for the same reason: greed and the love of mammon. And finally, the pickle slicer. Mickey O'Flynn worked in an Irish pickle factory. For many years he had a powerful desire to put his penis in the pickle slicer. Unable to stand any longer, he sought professional help from the factory psychologist. After 6 months the therapist gave up. Mickey was advised to go ahead and do it, or he'd probably never have any peace of mind. The next day he came home from work very early. His wife Mary became alarmed and wanted to know what had happened. Mickey tearfully confessed his tormenting desire to put his penis in the pickle slicer. He went on to explain that finally today he went ahead and did it, and he'd been immediately fired. Mary gasped and ran over to her husband. Quickly she yanked down his pants and shorts, only to find a normal, completely all intact penis. She looked up and said, "I don't understand. What about the pickle slicer?" Mickey replied, "Oh, I think she got fired too." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.